So thank you, Lily Chen, for making time for us. I really, yeah, I'm
Likewise.
formalizing it now. So uh, I'll try to take up not too much of your time, but I really appreciate
Oh, no
it.
worries.
So are we actually in your Reese building studio right now?
Yeah, yeah. Right now things are kind of like in flux. I don't want to move this because I'm worried I can't get it back. But yeah, I have some of my oil lamps and stuff. Things are kind of like all over the place. I don't know if you can see,
Yeah,
but
it's beautiful. I'm seeing these ceramic
yeah,
pieces. I'm seeing hands, like life cast hands.
yeah, yeah. So I have those oil lamps, and I'm gonna be arranging them with light casted hands, and I'm gonna be putting like a wick in them and lighting them with fire. So you're sort
Wow,
of seeing them in a kind of in progress state. Um, so yeah, it's on
perfect.
the ground right now. I don't know. You're now on the ground.
I, I'm
Yeah.
seeing the
So these
pieces.
are kind of like. Can you? I can't.
Yes.
Okay. So these are casted forms. They're actually they've been made of plaster. My hand, and they've been painted with oil paint. So I'm just sort of experimenting with configuring them. I don't know if you can see very well. I'm sorry.
No, it's good.
Wasn't
It's
really
good. I mean,
ready for
it's
doing
a little grainy because of the
a sort
quality.
of a sort of like video kind of walkthrough like this.
I think this is awesome.
Um,
I love this.
but let's see. I'll make you a little more mobile. I'm gonna. Can you? Is it crazy if I rotate it?
No, that's good. I like the horizontal. We're definitely gonna. It's better because now I can expand it to take up my full screen. So this is awesome. Um,
Okay.
so these are live cast.
I don't know if it's lit well enough. These are life casted using alginate. Um, yeah, so this is using alginate, and then I casted. So they're one offs. I don't make multiples of them. But yeah, I've made a few of those. They're mostly my hands, but I'm going to be accumulating more hands. And I cast them with plaster. They sometimes break because it's sort of brittle, and I sort of reassemble them. I kind of like it when it's kind of it doesn't look so precisely realistic. I don't need to have that level of precision. I like the impression of the hand just as much as I like the hand itself. And the original idea was to kind of work with fragments of body parts and juxtapose them with these oil lamps that I've been making. So this is made of plaster, and then this is made of porcelain paper clay. Um, and I'll glaze the inside, sometimes a different color than the outside. So yeah, for like the past year, I was looking at these ancient oil lamps as an inspiration, and I've been making a few of them, and eventually they're going to be arranged to be in an installation. I haven't completely defined where they're going to end up. I have some ideas about bringing them out to a site and documenting them with a camera and putting them in context and putting a wick in here and putting some oil in here and lighting it up. Um, so you're seeing everything in a very much in progress state. I'm sorry, it's not completely finished.
Well, I mean that's the best kind of way to see the work because we've gone to galleries. We see the kind of produced version of the work where everything is nicely put together and the walls are beautifully finished. And to actually see the work as it's ongoing in the studio is a very different kind of encounter with it. So it might turn into a video piece, but you are thinking
Yeah,
of it becoming an installation, like a sculptural
yeah,
installation of sorts, where people will actually walk among the work. Do you imagine that? I mean, just a thought. Do you imagine the having the lamps with oil and flame in the space? Is that going to be really problematic? Or
yeah. I mean, I'd love to do that. Of course, there's logistics, and I haven't really gotten there in terms of thinking about how to deal with replenishing the oil. And if I did have like an open flame, whether that's like going to be able to work in a gallery, I didn't really want that to stop me from making
no?
those. So those logistics will be worked out a little bit later on. But I think that, it doesn't necessarily have to be with the wick and with the flame when it's seen. I mean, I have worked with ceramics since about 2012, and sometimes what happens is the ceramics are in a video documentation in the context that I want them to be.
Mhm.
And what arrives out of that is either the video or photographs combined and juxtaposed with the static object. So the object itself ends up being kind of a, I wouldn't say a prop, but sort of it's animated in the video, and then it's inanimate, but it's active. It's got a potentiality when it's sitting in the gallery.
Yeah.
Working with clay is a very labor-intensive process, and it's very time-consuming. It requires weeks. If you're lucky, more likely months, because you're spending a lot of time working with wet-dry process. So clay, it's wet, and then you wait for it to dry. If you wanted to rework it, you have to wet it down, and then you have to shave it down. So you're working with a form for a while, and then you think you're done, but you're not done because it has to go to the fire, has to bake, and then after that you get it out, and then you have to glaze it, and then it completely changes when you glaze it. So there's a constant surprise element, and also, I'd say that the process of making the oil lamps really kind of began from just sort of a motivation to create these oil lamps because of a kind of just an interest in old technology and sort of what sort of technology we had in order to gain illumination before we had electrical energy and light. On my website, and that one actually was made from wet slip with this series of painting onto a form and then it drying. So it's literally layers that have adhered together, and I think of these as sort of screens that acquire a surface of being informed by the process. I think of these screens as related to maybe screens that we interact with, like television screens or monitor screens, but instead of having an image, the surface becomes like a materiality.
Mm-hmm.
So this, in terms of thinking about the liquid that hardens, this is very much dealing with a liquid state where I brush onto a form, and after maybe 100 layers, you get a form like this. And sometimes due to the sort of interaction of heat, sometimes there might be involved cracks or some kind of very pronounced seam. Yeah, I guess when I'm working with clay, it gives me an opportunity to be spontaneous as I'm working with it. It can be really frustrating because there's a lot of traditional rules that one sort of needs to follow in order to be successful in creating a piece. And so even though, I have a more spontaneous method, sometimes there's a very circuitous way of arriving at the final form. And I'm not the kind of person that is even if I'm making an oil lamp, for example, or this kind of oil lamp, I may use a photograph. For these, I was researching ancient oil lamps from Israel and Judea, but when it actually comes finished, it's not going to look exactly the same as the photograph. Yeah. So that's just kind of a variety of what you see here. I'm just sort of giving. It's easier when I put the camera facing down. Obviously, I don't have Instagram.
Well, it's incredible to see the range. Is there a huge range in historical time period from whence these lamps originated or the designs originated?
Oh yeah. This is some of the earliest oil lamp sort of style. This is one of the earliest styles. It's very primitive. You sort of make kind of a sort of a bowl shape, and then you kind of fold it in so that you have a spout, and suddenly you have an oil lamp.
Wow.
And this becomes this is a little bit later. Obviously, the one with multiple mouths is a lot later. So yeah, the time span is probably at least 2,000 years.
Wow.
So about that, yeah. I'm sort of interested in history and just sort of very ancient things. That's another one here. But I mean, and it also changes, because I'll show you one that I really did not like. So this is one that I really did not like. I hated the color. I thought it looked like speckly and diseased, like a giraffe or something. I was like, gosh. The colors made me think of giraffe, but it just it's I didn't like it. But then when I put it in context of everything else, I started thinking that it was a lot more interesting rather than just on its own. So when I'm dealing with making these objects, and I am oftentimes kind of going, like, I'm working like in a tunnel, like I'm making one of these at a time. And I can't necessarily see the big picture. And when I take them out of the kiln, or they come out of the fire, I really dislike them. I may bring them back into my studio and put them in context, and all of a sudden, I begin to really appreciate them. And that's sort of how it is. You can't really take something from the shop, like from the ceramic studio, and tell whether they're really compelling or not without that bringing them into your own space and seeing them in an arrangement. So,
is it difficult to work across media, or do you have a certain medium that is like the medium that you think in, that is your kind of intrinsic brainstorming medium, in your view?
I would say that I don't really have. I mean, I've been steadfastly working with clay and weaving and working with video. I sort of think of it not so much as whether I have to work with a specific medium, but more rather how the concept or the idea works best with the media that I'm going to choose. So, I mean, this work, for example, comes out with an intention, but some other pieces that I have are dealing with the act of collecting and arranging and assembling, which this does too, because even though this has like a certain kind of intention with the oil lamp and the hands, the arrangement of how they're going to be in the site, in the environment, is very much how I'm going to deal with it as I'm going to assemble it together once all the pieces are complete. And I think of that sort of methodology as applicable, or very much the case when I'm working with video. So if I'm working with video or working with film, I will have footage that I've acquired over a period of time. And when I'm ready to make a film, for example, I made Laylapse. It's a two-channel video that was on the exterior windows of the Ely Center last year. It was, I arrived at that by working with footage that I acquired over a span of 6 years. Wow. And I was going into my archive and dealing with new arrangements and creating new montages. So you could kind of say that there's sort of a method of like the montage structure that carries over both from filmmaking to this assemblage, sort of installation, arrangement, scavenging. Mm-hmm. Scavenging, I use this term as a way of kind of collecting and using the object that I had made, but recontextualizing it from the original time that I had created it.
But I would like to ask if there's any element of your personal history, your family history, your cultural history that factors into, that it influences what you're making at these moments. We often find when we visited galleries that contemporary artists who are kind of sourcing or referring back to their personal biography and in talking about the sourcing or the influences behind their work.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's a sort of it's a good question. I have a really pluralistic background. Let's put it this way. I grew up in Oregon, and then I moved to Singapore when I was pretty like 10. And then I came to New York for college, and I've been here since. But my family lives in Singapore, so my quote unquote immigration path is very. It's not typical, you know. I mean, there's a lot of moving forwards and going backwards, if you will, or moving forwards and coming to the States and then going back and then coming back. So I'd say that in terms of identity, I have a more pluralistic identity that doesn't, I don't feel an allegiance to either place in a way that I have to, include, that I want to include in my work, because it's hard to define to begin with, and it's hard to put in words. I would say that growing up in Oregon exposed me to a great amount of nature. And nature is consistent in my work. I would say that if there's anything kind of personal that does come in the work, because I grew up with a pretty kind of like a Christian upbringing, there's a lot of touchstones that I find in biblical stories that are really fascinating to me that kind of emerge in my work. They're sort of subdued, but they're definitely part of like the ecology of thinking that goes on in my studio, if that makes sense. And I think that there's this really strong interest in ancient things, really old things, because, well, my mother is Hakka, which is she's Chinese, but it's a dialect of Chinese that were considered sort of the Jews of the Chinese, because they don't really have a sort of homeland, so they're kind of nomadic. They've kind of sort of transferred through different parts of China, and there's this kind of nomadic sort of dwelling passage that has occurred in my sort of ancestral history that I think definitely comes up in my work, for sure. This kind of gleaning, sort of, you know, trying to sort of recover things that are old as an act of preservation, sort of preserving the past in a way that maybe might come up as nostalgic or sentimental, but it's really also an effort to try to breathe life into something that is maybe disappearing or has disappeared, or trying to recover a past that is sort of unknown to one's current moment, but believing that sort of ancestral history has some kind of significance.
And I think I'll just finish up with the question about whether was there one moment that you remember where you decided that you wanted to go on the path of an artist or a filmmaker, if that was your original goal. Is there anything you could remember that was like that eureka moment where you knew this was for you?
I think when I was young, really young, I remember riding in my mom's car, and I pulled out like a pen, and I just used the vibration of the car ride to create a drawing on a piece of paper. And I declared it a drawing. And I think that was sort of like my first moment of making art without declaring it art, if that makes sense. It's like, I realized that there was an artist named William Anastasi, I think, that made these subway drawings with the same technique. But I mean, I was just really like, you know, just sort of having fun there, but also thinking I was making something kind of cool, because I was making a drawing that was from these vibrations from their car, not like trying to make like a realistic drawing. And I think that element of chance also really informs my work today still. I remember that when I was a teenager, sort of after I graduated from high school in Singapore, I interned at a theater company, and I was working as sort of a kind of like a stage manager, sort of assisting the stage manager. So when they were doing rehearsals, I'd be around helping with the lighting and stuff, and be able to observe the actors and their kind of method acting, or sometimes the theater director was very avant-garde and experimental. So he'd give like prompts to actors and ask them to sort of embody the character. And I was really just moved by what I witnessed. And I think that there was something that transcended in my thinking, where I thought, okay, if this is just this is fiction, and if this is, if this is just a play, how can it feel so absolutely real? How can this experience feel like so embodied and so palpable? And I was really enchanted. So I think after that experience, I just felt, when I went to undergrad at Prague, I felt really compelled to work in sort of the lineage of installation art, because I was interested in creating environments that people would inhabit, to have a sort of a transported experience that reminds me or harkens back to that experience that I had at the theater company. So that was a real turning point. I mean, he also kind of, the theater director had also introduced me to John Cage, Meredith Monk, sort of people from the New York avant-garde. So that became very influential to my development as an artist. Yeah.
Thank you so much for spending time with us.
Okay. Thanks, Brian.
Okay.